having it for a while, so she just finally got it looked at because I kind of forced her.
Uh, which gets us to the subject for today's call, manipulation.
Manipulation.
All right, give me just a jiffy. Let me go ahead and label the call. Get things underway. So, hi, everybody. It's T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle of the Self. Today is the discovery session for exploration number 3, I think is what we're up to. This was about defending against manipulation. So, lots of activities around that one. So,
Interesting one.
oh, was it good? Good, good. Well, so tell us what made it interesting in particular.
I just for whatever reason, scenarios, as I was reading each question, scenarios kept popping into my head.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, I would say the same. In fact, I think I answered it again from a personal, like, am I being manipulated? Not if I have been. So
Right, right. Occur, yeah.
Me too.
So that'll be interesting to see what the results are.
Well, particularly since recognizing that you were manipulated after the fact is probably a far less useful than recognizing you're being manipulated while it's
Exactly.
happening. So there is that. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Any other general thoughts before we kind of look at the results?
No.
I was just going to say, I'm not normally on these Monday calls. I usually have a conflict, but I found this particular topic very interesting for me right now. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Kathy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. So, well, this is a good opportunity for me to remind everyone who's just listening to the recording that if you've not already done so, there was a ChangeWorks profile that was developed specifically for this call. The explorers in our community have already had the opportunity to fill that out. And so that's the results we're looking at today. But if you haven't already had the opportunity to fill it out, there'll be a link to the profile underneath the video. So just look in the description block. All right, so what I always like to do is look at the big picture before we get into the big details. So let me go and look at the ChangeWorks profile. I would go to changeworksystem.com, click on System Access, go ahead and log in. This is on the Oracle account. You guys, obviously, you would be logging in. If you were a practitioner, you would be using it to create your own ChangeWorks profile. You'd be using my personal change grid. But we've been putting together these group profiles specifically for the Oracle. So let's see where we're at in it. So this one's defending against manipulation. 8 of you filled it out. Let's go ahead and take a look at the change grid. Okay, just as a quick little review for you guys, these were some of the activities we were looking at. And by the way, I decided to phrase the activities in a different sort of style. Those of you that are already ChangeWorks trained, certified, etc., you may notice that multiple verbs are being used, and that violates some of the most, fundamental rules about creating an appropriate activity list for a change grid. But someone mentioned that this is kind of like a style that's being used more and more when it comes to talking about behavioral characteristics or whatever. So strengthening emotional resilience, fortify your emotional armor. It's almost like it's giving you some advice or some direction that you would be going in if you were doing this front end piece. So if you were embracing skepticism, you'd be cultivating a healthy dose of doubt when needed. And so I thought, all right, well, this looks like an interesting way to do it, but it's going to be very interesting to see how this way of phrasing activities affected your thought processes as you went about completing the change grid. Did it prompt you to think more about specific scenarios, experiences, past, present, or considered for the future? Or what? Did it have any impact, or is it better when we stay strict and just say there's only one verb that's got one outcome and that's where we stay? Thoughts
I
about
liked
that?
it. I liked it, actually.
Okay, tell me a little bit about why.
Well, particularly like when you think about skepticism, I'm always skeptical. Like, I have a healthy dose of
You are not.
skepticism. I'm trained as a scientist, so I like ask questions all the time. But that commentary afterwards said, "Oh, okay, this is the context," and look at it, because again, I came to it from the fact like, am
Yeah,
I
but
being manipulated?
Right, but Brian, in your head, at the moment you gave us whatever responses you gave, did
Mhm.
you have something very specific in mind that you were answering on behalf of?
Yeah, like all the research and things that I go through that
All right.
the hasn't been replicated. And so these are things that we depend on, like BMI. Like that's one of the things the doctor was telling my sister is helpful for her to not have to have a repeat. And she had all this
Hmm.
research about BMI, but I said, okay, but the BMI is severely flawed.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's that
yeah.
kind of thing. So I think about these kinds of things all the time. And so having another verb kind of helped me to just like, oh, okay, am
Good.
I questioning this right? Or,
Yeah, because at first I thought, well, what I could certainly do is I could put the second half of it in the description block to provide the explanation. I thought like, you know what? We'll just give it a whirl, see how it all turns out. So yeah, good. All
Yeah,
right.
T, I'd love to comment on this, on the way you've during this is exactly the way I've designed competency models.
Oh, do tell.
And because it's a verb, it's an ing, it's a
Yep.
gerund.
Right.
And then it has a specific definition that says the behavioral component, one of the major behavioral aspects you want to look at under this competency would be this definition. And
Mhm.
so for me, it's much easier to work with, and it did trigger specifics for me. So I happen just personally, because it's the way I design competency models, that it works.
All right. Well, I mean, this is some great positive feedback on it. And so, we're going to do a different subject every single week. I'd love to know if we can further refine the way that activities are spelled out so that people who might be filling out their very first change grid, I want to say, might find it a less daunting task or find it a little more, let's say, useful, because we're looking at those situations. Anyway, there we go. So, the thing I always like to look at first, though, is the statistics. So I'm going to select all activities, all of you. By the way, just again as a reminder, you guys are free to make up a name, make up a phone number. We really don't care who's filling it out, and we have no intention of reaching out to you after the fact. So when we're doing a small group profile like we are right now, people's names are visible in it. When we get to be a group of more than 26, then you're going to see this things change. But bottom line, you can make up whatever name you really, really want to make, and make up a fake phone number if you want to. But you have to make sure your email address is correct. Otherwise, the system can't send you your results. So I'm just going to ask it to give us the statistical report. And while there's a lot of information in this report, I'm only interested right now in rankings. So let's see how you guys rank these. And although they're in the opposite order, I always like to look at importance first. Now, again, I'm looking at importance for two reasons. First of all, I'd like to have some sort of validation that the activities that I chose to put in front of you um, are things that you guys all agree are important. I would hate to put together an activity list of things you guys consider to be trivial. So this is some validation for me. I also think when I look at importance, I can do a better job of paying attention to where you are all finding your tension when it comes to this particular life situation. And so interestingly enough, you had a few things pretty much tied, right at around 10. So 10, 10.1. Now, remember, it's a 12-point scale. So the average importance rating you provided as a, in this particular population could have been as high as 12. Well, 10 is pretty darn high. And we consider anything 8 or higher to be in the high range. And so interesting to see that everything you rated was between 9.3 and 10.1. That's less than 1 point of difference from top to bottom of the ones you gave. So yay. So, but nevertheless, relatively speaking, these activities that have averaged higher for a reason. And so let's take a look at the activities you consider to be the most important of the ones we looked at. So first one, recognizing cognitive biases. Be aware of your own mental blind spots. You guys consider that to be very important. Promoting empathy, understanding others without surrendering your own power, tied with recognizing that. And then the next one, number 10, the average score of 10, seeking diverse insights, broaden your perspectives through varied sources. So now, usually, if all I do is look at the importance rankings, I should be able to predict that I'm going to see these same activities appear in the other lists in areas that we consider noteworthy for reasons I'll review very momentarily. Just glancing at it right now, that has not happened this time. So usually we see a strong pattern that things you consider to be very important also seem to be things that when it came to how you rated your challenge, you also considered quite challenging. But if I look at the challenge scale here, the rankings for challenge, again, 8 or higher would be considered high. Anything below 8 would be considered the moderate scale. So the majority of these things you guys consider to be right on the border of those two things between 7.5 and 8.3. Again, less than a 1-point spread. But these are pretty tight numbers right around some of them are a little bit more important than others, but look, none of them are some of the things are a little more challenging than others, but look, they're all pretty much the same when it comes to the amount of effort that we have to put forward. You guys understand what I'm saying? Between 7.5 and 8.3, this doesn't really give me much in terms of range and challenge ratings to do anything with. You guys agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I would also expect to see a simultaneous placement in the lower part of the list for these when it comes to ability, because usually the high ability and high challenge and low ability tend to go together, and they get exacerbated when someone's perceived level of importance is high. So you get the idea, I'm looking for that triple whammy, and that's not happened in this activity set. Interestingly enough, again, when it comes to how you guys have reported your perceived level of ability to handle each one of these mission critical activities, you're presenting yourself as being at the border of high, actually leaning into high for every single one of these. Now, 8 is no 12. There's a lot of work there, a lot of spread available to us in expanding your ability, but I'm not seeing anything that is, speaking to a pattern that is making any of these activities stand out among all the rest of them to say, this is what we should be paying attention to on today's call. So once in a while, we do see change grids that are like this, where things really are kind of like spread out all over the place. And so we have another way of reading change grids when we encounter such a thing. Okay, but stopping for ratings for just a set, rankings, thoughts, comments about rankings?
Nope.
Nope. Again, it's all very, very tight kind of stuff. So we'll kind of look at some specific answers instead and see what's going on. So what I like to do is either ask for a volunteer to have their grid read, or do a quick click through them activity by activity to see which ones are screaming at us. So always like to do it by way of a volunteer. So would anyone like to have their change grid be the subject matter of the next few minutes?
Right.
And they're all still muted.
I wouldn't mind, but I'd like to see Tom's.
Okay, well, so Tom, Brian, Anja, David, you open to it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Sure.
good. All right, well then, let me just kind of jump around a little bit. First, we're going to leave all activities selected, but let me just kind of choose someone there. Well, David, you're first, so let's go ahead and do you first. Wait, deselect all, learn how the software works. It's only been 40 years. View the change grid. Yeah, there's been lots of variations. I mean, this tool existed as nothing but paper and pencil for the first half of its lifespan. Good grief. Okay, so this is David's profile. Just to help you guys better understand what you're looking at. Each activity is represented by a number. That number corresponds to whatever number it is on the activity list itself. And so we're looking at the numbers 1 through 12. Where the number is located is a reflection of the answers that David gave when it came to perceived ability and perceived challenge. So when it comes to activity number 10, for example, which for everyone's curiosity, is promoting empathy, understanding others without surrendering your power. Activity number 10, David gave himself a 10 for ability and an 8 for challenge. That puts him right there. You'll notice that the number is red. The color of a number is an indication of how he rated things on the importance scale. And because it's red, he rated it as high importance. And then the color of the circle surrounding the number is a reflection of the size rating that David gave for this. So red would be a large size, yellow, green, smaller sizes. So he considers this to be a big activity that's really important. And he's got a level of ability of a 10 and a challenge of an 8. That means he possesses a good 25% more ability than the challenge at hand is requiring at this point in time for that activity. Okay, so that's just a quick little orientation to what you guys are looking at. Now, when we're reading someone's change grid, we tend to obey the only rule that ChangeWorks has ever had, and that is we pay attention to where people find their tension. And so whatever activities are plotting highest on your change grid, by the way, this is a great opportunity for all of you who did do the ChangeWorks profile and do have it available, take a look at it. So this is what I'd be doing or will be doing when I take a closer look at your individual grid. So we pay attention to tension is the first rule. So anything that David had that was plotting up in stress or power stress, we'd certainly want to talk about those things first. And then we get to the things in power, etc. Well, notice that David has nothing in stress. In fact, let's change our background image to just the different response states. David has nothing in stress, nothing in power stress. Everything is in power, nothing in power apathy, nothing in apathy. And so as far as these activities are concerned, we could all pull out our little quick reference guide and read across that power line and read all the different characteristics. So we know that the emotions that David's experiencing around this activity set are variations on pride. He feels confident. So it's all good stuff that's going on emotionally, supporting him. He's obviously plotting a bit more outgrid. Let's take a look at the different styles. So we'll do this a little more outgrid on activities than the others. There's a few little floaters around there, but mostly outgrid. So we know outgrid energy is about wanting to make something happen. He's not in any danger zones on any activities, even though he's outgrid. He's a good margin away from a danger zone. So we don't need to do any kind of interventions or what's going on. And so I continue to just kind of say that this particular plotting tells us that we have an individual who views their ability as being strong to quite strong indeed, who is dealing with the challenges, the puzzles that are being presented by this particular life situation. So with that, I'll be quiet for a second and say, David, what would you like to say at this point? Does this match, not match?
No, it does match. And I did look at this before and I thought it was quite interesting. A lot of driver behavior, but a lot of analytical and amiable behavior, secondary
Absolutely.
energy as well.
Absolutely.
And so I found that interesting.
Yeah. So let's take a look at that. We'll switch the layer. Is interesting because none of them are in the driven driver
Right.
quadrant on that. And so these are more things like an expressive driver tries to accomplish the driver activity or the driver goal of getting somewhere by working through expressive channels. So this is about getting people excited about whatever it is, saying positive, being a visionary, being a good communicator, etc. around these particular activities. And for activities number 2 and 8, questioning motives, probing intentions to uncover hidden agendas. And number 8, practicing mindfulness, staying grounded and centered at the present moment. That one we'd need to talk about. But right now, you're all for it. You're all for it, man. Yeah, you do think it's important and all that, but that's not the ideal location for that activity, as we'll get into a bit later on. But yeah, so what we do again, when we're reading grids, we want to pay attention. If there's nothing up there up grid that's screaming for that immediate thing, we look at danger zones. Do we have anything we really need to get in there and do some intervention around? Answer no. And so for David's grid, we're looking at something where virtually everything, I think again, is in power. A couple of things might be close to a border with power stress. Yeah, but there it's all in there. This is all very workable. This is a developmental grid. So it's a grid that's basically saying to whoever he might be working with, I could benefit from a little bit of ability development for certain activities because I rated myself as low as a 5, few things at 6, one thing at 7. And, I'd certainly like to have an ability, that's even stronger, if you will, blah, blah. And so there's a developmental opportunity there. And there may also be some sort of opportunity to help you move the level of challenge down a little bit on some of these activities, just to make it all more of that heart line of power flow sort of experience. And so I would go more into trainer mode and coach mode with David. And so David, any of these activities in particular grab your attention?
Well, the one that you mentioned, certainly I'm a long way from the ideal location on that.
Yep.
And what was that? That was promoting empathy and understanding others without
No. It's about practicing mindfulness.
practicing mindfulness. Yeah, no, I'd
Yeah.
rather be at 6-6 for that.
Well, exactly right. Then you can see for the desired location, that's what we put there, really a 6-6 kind of a thing. So let's take a look at that for just a second. I'll probably do that using the balance layer. Now, actually, you know what? Let me just play with the grid for just 1 second. I only want that one activity because I want to be able to show the desired location on these. This is just a little best practice for you guys as you're looking at change grids. You can turn on a lot of different things and a lot of different combinations, but certain combinations are going to help you see something more clearly than others may. And in this particular case, the discussion with David around activity number 8, again, a coaching discussion, is about recognizing the gap between where he is and the ideal location for this activity to be performed. And so we'd like to make sure that the grid is showing that. And it can only do that one activity at a time, or it becomes something that's almost impossible to really understand. So we have one grid with one activity plotting there. Now, interestingly enough, it didn't give me the ideal location for this. That's strange because it should be at 6-6. So I need to take a closer look at that. But nevertheless, the ideal location is 6-6. Why? But because when we have an activity, let me just change one more thing. I'm just going to show all of you so you can see the ideal location. So select all respondents, only activity number 8. And again, as you guys are creating your own ChangeWorks profiles, this is how you play with it. Just feel free to do whatever you feel like doing. This is all of you on that. And so you can see that the ideal location is in the exact center of the change grid. Individual E, whoever you may be, Brian, is at a great location for that. But the majority of you are floating much further out grid around that activity that may be serving you well. On average, you're barely tipping your toe into the area where life is lived, kind of a thing. So I would say H, who's H? Kathy, you're out grid pretty much around that as well. And David, you are as well. And Hassan, Chris, you are as well. So we can take.
Can I comment on that, T?
Yeah, please do.
Because I meditate a couple of times a day, and I teach meditation. And what's wild about that is that when I was doing it, I think that I felt the vulnerable, because I have a whole media thing with number 2 about eyesight.
Yes.
And I was thinking about media, social media and media. And all I can say is that I feel compelled to spend more time meditating in order to reach my center. So it felt more like.
Yep. Yeah, and I know you brought that up.
You know what and so that's why I look at that and I understand the 6-6, but it's like, Yeah, okay, so that says something about where I am, obviously, but it's,
Exactly. And but I think what you've just said really gives people the perfect insight to what this gap is really all about. This gap is really all about your awareness of something about which you would be totally unaware if it was at its purest form, right? If you were pure in a pure state of mindfulness, would you even notice that you're in a pure state of mindfulness? I think what's happening is that Kathy and David and Chris, you might be, and others obviously, you might be noticing that there is a gap. You're putting effort into it. You're putting thought into an activity that maybe doesn't need thought when it's at its purest kind of form. And so it's that working to get back to it. It's about that claim of it. Does that resonate at all?
yes.
Yes.
Yep. And so, yeah, ideally, we'd like that whole thing to be a non-issue. But the truth is that depending on what's going on in your life on the day and time that you filled out the change grid, there may be some issue that's going on in life that has pulled you out of that mindfulness state that you might find more natural, if you will. So it's disrupted whatever's going on, and you have the ability, because you have the knowledge, the skill, etc., to be mindful, practice those things. But it's about saying, like, I need to practice these things, I need to get actively, let's change the background image, I need to get myself engaged and execute on these particular mindfulness exercises. Kathy, does that resonate with you?
No, absolutely. And it's just something that's been for, top of mind recently. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to get on this call and take this grid,
I'm
because
so glad, yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's very accurate. I'd love to be at a 6-6 all the time around manipulation.
Well, right. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But the truth is that how our the frequency and the intensity at which we're being confronted by manipulation is only going up. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's this thing that's part and parcel of life as we know it today, that isn't going to take care of itself. And so the burden sits squarely and exclusively on our own shoulders to learn and recognize when that manipulation is happening so that we can defend ourselves early on. And by the way, don't think for one moment that all y'all aren't manipulators yourselves. So it's
Mm-hmm.
also about becoming aware of when you're the one who's manipulating a situation. I mean, look, on Friday, I told all of you to fill out a change grid, right? And so how do I get you to do that? How do I get you to follow through? I got to choose a good subject. I got to give you good activities.
And
Uh,
nag.
yeah, again, nag. Yes. You
Oh,
guys
that's
know that.
funny.
Well, in all seriousness, for any of you on the call who have done large ChangeWorks profiles for corporations, and the corporations want everyone to fill it all out, and they give you all the emailing lists and all that, and you got to like take attendance. You have no idea what chasing people down is to get them to fill out a 5 or 10 minute long profile. It's hysterical. But it's the way it is. It's the way it is. It's all tension management. Intention management, when we're applying it to self or we're applying to others, does fall in the category of manipulation. By the way, I didn't do it. This isn't the course in manipulation, so it's not like there's a curriculum around it. But I should tell you that one of the best definitions, and probably the original definition for manipulation, is to do something skillfully with the hands. So manus manum lawat, Latin, one hand washes the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so manipulation is about something that's physically done with the hands with a tremendous level of skill. At some point in time, and I don't know when, we could ask Chat GPT and be enlightened, but manipulation started to go outside of what people were doing with their hands and became far more, I want to say, diabolical and sinister techniques.
Mm-hmm.
It's
So,
usually like magic.
yeah,
Like
like
I was gonna say, like magicians.
well, and
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing. The difference between magicians and manipulators is
Oh.
that the magician does not hide the fact that they are deceiving you.
They
Mm-hmm.
do
The
they speak
manipulation, in
magic and it's
fact,
not.
what's that now?
they say it's magic and it's not. That's
Well,
manipulation.
right. But we got to think about this because I think there's a really important lesson in this whole thing. And that is that we know that when we go to see a magician do their thing, um, we are going there because we want them to deceive us. That's why we're giving them the money. In
That's why I
fact,
don't know.
and our greatest joy is when we figure out how they did it.
Mhm.
But they make no mistakes about it. Yeah, they may say in their rhetoric that they've got this mystique about them and blah, blah, blah. But everyone who sits in that audience knows that what you are looking at is manipulation skills. I mean, true physical manipulation skills. And so the difference is all about the contract that's in place. I've given them permission by giving them money to manipulate me, and I'm going to do my best to figure out how. And maybe, just maybe, if it's a good trick, I'm not going to tell everybody how the trick is done. Get the idea? So it's kind of like it's an agreement between people. It's a puzzle. It's intellectually stimulating. It's all those kinds of things. However, if you've got magicians that are doing those things in the form of crimes, like magicians are also the world's best pickpockets. Magicians are the world's best card sharks. They're the best, whatever that little crime is. So jewelry thieves, switching sorts of stuff, all that. That's a looking at their motives. But the person who owns the jewelry or whatever has not given them permission to do it. Now you've got someone who's manipulating you with their own motives in mind and not really caring how you're affected by it whatsoever. And certainly as manipulation leaves physical things and becomes things like coercive messaging, toxic messaging, even just repeated false messaging, whatever it happens to be, we know that they are trying to accomplish their outcome, which generally has money involved with it, but they have not entered into an agreement with you that it's okay for them to manipulate you, right? So I know that's a lot, but I think it's a really important distinction between magic and manipulation, as we kind of know it. That being said, the world's best manipulators are highly skilled, highly skilled.
For
Uh,
sure.
and as well practiced as magicians, but there's been no agreement struck between the manipulators and the victims. And the point is, or really no, the real perplexing part of manipulation is that I genuinely believe, you guys can tell me if your life experience is showing you something different, that the vast majority of manipulation that is coming our way from others is not being directed specifically to us for sinister stuff. It's just life happening. The weather manipulates us. um we're constantly being impacted, and I don't think that whatever it is that's headed my way was actually being directed my way, as much as I'm just accidentally in the manipulation cloud. Can you guys feel what I'm talking about when it's like accidental,
Yes.
incidental, unintentional manipulation, but it's all around us? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, it would be great to be able to diminish that, or but I don't know that that's even in the realm of possibilities. I don't know that it would be the worthwhile pursuit. What I do know is there's a lot of manipulation happening out there that we might want to say need to control, because there's a science afoot, and if we're not good at defending ourselves against manipulation, they're going to be better at their manipulation working.
Exactly. That's
This,
why I think it has to be intentional in terms of
right.
attention.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yes.
right. People pay attention to where they find their tension. And a manipulator is manipulating one thing, and that's people's tension. So I pay attention to where I find my tension. If you want me to pay attention to your message, then your message is going to have to grab my attention. And that means there's going to be something physical, emotional, and intellectual at play, right? We define tension as the level of physical, emotional, and intellectual activity a person's experiencing at a given moment in time. add it all up, blend it all together, you end up with a certain level of productive tension. If that manipulator is into me intellectually, emotionally, physically, one or a combination of those things, the more of that they've got going, the more manipulated I'm going to be. And so that's why people who just have verbal messages of manipulation might want to get you to a rally, right? Might want you to participate in something that's going to get you more emotionally involved. So there's testimonials coming from, deeply rooted, heartfelt situations, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea? Tension is physical, emotional, and intellectual activity. Manipulators are working inside of one or a combination of those three domains to get you to do whatever it is they want you to do.
But you know what I was thinking about, T, when I took this, is in terms of the physical, mental, and emotional, right? The way the body communicates this bottom up, top down. These are afferent nerves, neurons communicate bottom up, and there's 4 times more afferent neurons moving up into the brain than there are efferent moving down. So,
Right.
like the thinking.
Muscles. Yep.
So this is where I was thinking like intuition plays a key role because you think about like something I never talked about before. All the countries I lived in, my father was with the World Health Organization. I was attempted kidnapped. And I remember the couple was trying to distract me with there was some sweet or something that I really liked.
Yeah.
And so, it made it seem like they were nice. And then I remember being grabbed and I bit the lady's hand so hard that she screamed, and that caught the attention of everyone else. But I think
Good for
about
you.
that, like how the intuition of a kid is so heightened. And then, a
Right.
pedophile or something like that.
Well,
try to distract
I think
them
it's
again.
also primal instincts that are there. It's
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
first and foremost, we are an animal and we do not want to be held captive.
Exactly.
Whatever weapons we've got available to us, we've got available to us. And if all of it is biting and screaming and scratching and kicking, then that's what we're going to do. That's our
Exactly.
primal nature. How
Right.
amazing that the kid had those instincts.
And
Whenever it
how
happens.
amazing that he got her to scream. That was the genius of it.
Yeah,
He didn't scream.
absolutely.
She did. Little kids scream all the time and people ignore it, but you get her to scream. That was brilliant.
Mhm.
Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that, Brian. That's a really important understanding of where you've been.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I this physical part, and Kathy talks about the somatic all the time. I just keep thinking how we, at times, by we I mean humanity, tends to undervalue it in terms of giving you good sensory input of what's going on around you that you can now utilize as key data to help you move in the direction that you need to move. So a lot of times we get the mental and emotional part because it's live and candid camera, but oftentimes the experience is going to happen through the body first before we actually rationalize it. And I don't think sometimes we value that for what it really is.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And again, if we look at this, the desired outcome for this idea about manipulation, it's just to be well insulated from it. It's be about aware. It really is about enhancing your inside the green circle sort of experience. But there's work to be done for these sorts of things. And for so many of you, you can see you're out here where life is being lived between that green circle and the red circle. And so I do think this is about a skill set. And I do think it's about acknowledging that there is this, threats too emotional, but there is this element that is in play in our daily lives. And it's not an innocent element. At times, we need to be able to recognize it and intervene when we can do that. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of the activities and see if one grabs anyone's attention, and then I want to look at someone else's change grid. There was this one thing about recognizing cognitive biases as the number one important one on the list, and I'm very curious to know. Oops, sorry. Very curious to know. Okay, that's not the screen I wanted, but give me a minute. I only want to know recognizing cognitive biases, and I'd like all of you in the pile. There we go. So Yeah. I think that in order for you guys to really recognize when you're being manipulated, you also have to recognize that when you are making the decision about whether you're being manipulated or not, I think it goes back to whatever your core beliefs happen to be. If someone's trying to manipulate you to do something about which you're already in full agreement, um, it's still happening. You just don't notice it because it matches who you are. You with me? It's like agreeing with something makes you more susceptible to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I was ever intending on turning these discovery sessions into some sort of like a, philosophical pursuit, but I think this activity lends itself to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Brian, do you have something you want to throw in there?
No, I was just going to say it has to resonate, right? All behavior, again, the key is when you speak about neurons, it has to fit like lock and key. So
Yes.
the only way something can actually resonate with you is that there is some kind of curiosity there, which means acetylcholine is present. So you want to learn about it, or it somehow emulates or matches closely to what's already associated in the brain. And
Mm.
so then it's going to resonate and you'll be more open to it than if it was just, something that didn't, where you just like, oh, no, this makes no sense at all.
Well, it's interesting to look at where this has ended up plotting then from what you've just said there. We say that for someone to do the best job of how do we phrase it here? Recognizing cognitive biases, be aware of your own mental blind spots. We thought, well, that's a driven analytical activity. I mean, you're doing it for a reason, and it's about paying attention to a detail. So we're thinking like around this general vicinity is a great place to be when you're doing that job well. And by the way, if I look at engagement rings, you're fully engaged in doing it. All that stuff's going along with it as well. On average, you guys are plotting where the triangle is, not far away, but none of you, as usually is the case, is represented properly by the average. You guys are all out here somewhere, and there's a different reality for each one of them. But there is something to be learned there. Otherwise, this particular location on the change grid, you are a driven, amiable driver. A driven, amiable driver is trying to get something done, but they want to do it by being supportive of people and feelings and connections and all that sort of stuff, but they still need to nudge to go forward. That's that third energy. And so there is a feeling right here that we need to get to the bottom of it. We need to figure it out, but I don't want to in any way upset anybody, including myself, but maybe I need to push a little bit around it. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like it's a little tiny dose of sometimes for you to grow, you have to recognize something about yourself that you may not have really wanted to see. You guys with me on this?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, something to
Definitely.
Yeah,
learn
I
and
think
explore.
right that's your amiable driver stuff that's trying to protect you from this, and the analytical driver is basically saying it's just information. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. So how you feel about it, blah blah, that doesn't change the it that we're looking at. So why don't we see what it is, and then we can decide what we're going to feel around it. And so I think that if you really did, in this particular case, is about biases, there are countless things online, and whether it's something you want to read or a video you want to watch, I don't even know if they've decided how many different cognitive biases exist. I know there's one model that says it's a whole pile of them, 100 plus, but I don't know that they said, and that's it, we'll never find another one. I don't know. And there might be others that just say, look, you can get really fine tuned, but there's also categories of biases. And maybe you
Mm-hmm.
just want to think about a category of bias before you get into the nitty gritty about why you value or trust or live that particular bias. But
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you this, no one notices a bias until they decide to step outside of themselves and observe the actual behavior. Okay,
Right.
thoughts about that?
Absolutely.
When I
Yeah.
was, when we had to do our dissertations, we had to do what they called an expose to really uncover your biases.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked people when they are going to do a due diligence is to do an expose, or when they're going to do work with somebody else, look at your own biases before you evaluate somebody.
Right, right, right,
Mhm.
right, right. There's a
Mhm.
reason why that bias exists, and that's part of the reason why this defending against manipulation is so important, because I believe that the long-term result of manipulation is the formation of a bias or reinforcement
Mhm.
of that bias, and ultimately a strengthening of the value system that was below that. So I think that a lot of what you guys think is really your personal truth was actually installed in you long ago by somebody else.
Absolutely. That's why I like what T just described, because I think, the bias codex says those are known biases. So we probably have a lot
Right.
more that we're just not aware of. And that's why I think ideally we want to, unpack or unfold like what's underneath, how we're contextualizing an event. Because whenever we're targeting something from the inside out or outside in, these what causes the stress, these different stress markers, if you will, is what's called a mobilization reflex. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone has a different threshold for that. And by mobilization reflex, I mean the interoception. So that's this sensing, tracking, and being able to feel this internal landscape and
Yep.
how it's interacting externally with exteroception.
Yep.
And oftentimes that's not harmonized in a way that it could, have the most favorable outcome. It's biased one way or the other.
Well, and I think that that challenge gets even more pronounced when you're just trying to apply it to self. It's
Exactly.
one thing to be leading somebody else on this exploration, and it's another thing for you to say, like, no, this is the oracle of the self. This is supposed to be me learning how to have better conversations with me about me.
Right, right.
So that's where it kind of goes like, I don't even know what my biases are. And so that's why I do encourage people, anytime you see any kind of a profile or a test that allows you to discover your value system, or biases specifically, there might also be one on logical fallacies, which one you're most likely to fall victim to. But there's going to
Hmm.
be variations on that. You might find them just online in general. You might actually find them on YouTube. But anyway, there's plenty of them that are out there. But it's an interesting little thing to then go, all right, I can see that I do lean that direction. A bias just means that given a choice between two things, there's a preference that you're going to lean towards. Well,
Right.
that preference is what the bias is really all about. Some of them are very innocent and inconsequential, and others are very profound, very powerful, very problematic. So you just have to kind of know what your biases are. Well,
Yeah.
once you know what that bias is, there's going to be work to be done. You're going to have to do what was one of the activities down here? Questioning motives and embracing the skepticism. And what was the other one? Verifying the information, broadening your things. This is about how you end up correcting a lot of biases. Yep, yep, yep. Go ahead, Kathy, or was
I
that?
was going to say that, I mean, that whole component of understanding your biases was, and being able to explore them and be really clear about them was a critical component of my work as an anthropologist and a cross-cultural coach. Because going in to that kind of a situation, if you aren't aware of your own biases and you walk into
Mhm.
somebody else's culture,
Yep.
and you can't even begin to understand what that other person is experiencing until you are at least aware of where you're leaning and can question it and try to come back to the center,
Mhm.
as much as possible.
Yep,
And
yep.
that's what makes that kind of work so incredibly difficult, challenging, but
Right.
important. So
Well, and
yeah.
really, as you've just illustrated, what you've just said, that detachment, at least in part, equals setting aside one's own or known biases. That if you can recognize who you are, can you get yourself out of the way of
Mm.
learning about another culture in the case of an anthropologist, but learning the truth in general?
Hmm.
So why does a bias exist then? Why does the human brain even have biases? There's
Culture.
theological.
Reason
Culture.
to fear.
Well, that's where they came. They came from culture. That I know for sure.
I
But
think it's also why we have fear. The same reasons we have fear. It
all
helps
right,
us.
tell us about that. What is this instinctual element that biases?
It also saves you.
Exactly.
Save your
Exactly.
life.
Like
The bias
fear.
could save
Yeah.
your life. Depending on the bias, it could be because you've been programmed, if you will, earlier on to avoid situations that could put you in harm's way. It might be little biases that allow you to fine tune what the zone of safety or conflict may end up being in there. So,
It might also assist you into assisting others. I always think of a nurse or a doctor who has seems to have a lot of detachment. And I always wonder, how can you be detached? You have to work at it.
Yeah.
You know, if I think even me as a facilitator, I have to work from being detached from what they come up with for
right.
their values, vision, and mission.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Remember that it's not mine, it's theirs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Getting out of the way is critical for most of us in our professions, just getting out.
So
Yes.
how did you guys go about getting out of your own way? Did you have to learn some stuff or work with somebody? Was it just a lot of self-work, all the above?
All the above.
All of the above.
Some of my, like I said, when I wrote my dissertation, I had to write what I was biased about. And so I tend to do that a lot more now.
And
The
writing
biggest
the
teacher
bias
is
down, did that?
the biggest teacher is also failure. You know, when I have failed or failed, I mean, did not do what I wanted to be able to accomplish with something or what I thought was, you know, a really great outcome. It's usually because I didn't get out of my way enough. I wasn't detached enough and let my own biases come forward. And I'm talking about in a group facilitation session, a coaching session, a life experience. I mean, that's been my, I think failure is a great teacher there because it shows you if you can then learn from it what you where you didn't get out of your own way.
Well, and I have to ask, when you guys identified a particular bias and you were able to write it down, was there a goal in mind as far as the future with that bias? Um, are we saying that all biases are inherently limiting and so we need to set them aside, or are certain biases right? Ugh, I can't believe the answer would be correct, but you get the idea. Are there certain biases?
Yes, I think there are. I think a certain bias allows you to be aware of certain things when it's really
Exactly.
like at darkness. You know, I need to be aware of what's around me if I'm walking out
Yes.
there. I need to listen differently. So I have a bias, and you have to be, you have to.
Right.
So
And so
it's
that's a
okay.
bias. That's a bias that might have been, arose from instinct.
Yeah.
So then, we're
Exactly.
talking about where's the manipulation
Survival.
occurring? We've been manipulated at a genetic level,
Mm-hmm.
right, to end
And
up
that,
having that because no one had to teach T or any of us that nighttime increases threat levels or
right. And
whatever.
see, this is what I mean when I say mobilization reflex. So, at any given moment, when we're talking about these energetic portals, there's a mobilization reflex where the energy that is being emitted is trying to complete a cycle. And
Mm,
so, when it doesn't complete that cycle, that's when we go into what's called allostatic overload. And that's where stress builds up. And then that leads to this emotional debt. So, imagine the person who, like, lives in a war zone and they grew up in these third world countries like I lived and they're used to hearing guns and these kinds of things, but then you go to another country and it's not that way and you hear this, they're just going to react out of that, right? Because they're kind of mobilize themselves to respond a certain way. And so these kinds of things play out in any given moment. For me, like when I write down like what T was talking about, the idea of looking at my bias, I get to now question the relevancy of that in that moment,
Hmm.
particularly when I'm working with others. And so I'm looking at and assessing in real time what I call state versus story. Because
Okay.
again, we feel these things in our body first. So when we're up against something that doesn't mobilize or match that mobilization, we're going to have, something in our mental Rolodex, if you will, that says, no, that's not it. Something in our emotional Rolodex and say, no, that's not it. It doesn't match. It doesn't fit. And so therein becomes the challenge of completing that cycle. And that's part of this tension management that we're talking about. And so,
That was really helpful. I mean, I loved what Brian just said, and I think what hits me is that I'm somatic oriented only because I am so sensitive to energy around me physically. I am so sensitive, and I think that we physically feel things before we even register them mentally.
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and that's just what Brian was talking about. It's like you have to then understand, what are you feeling right now, and what is it causing you to think, so that you can step away from it, even just temporarily, even just for a few minutes, to be able to move on.
It's interesting because I'm not the most in the present moment person. And Kathy, hearing you, I know it's something that I have to improve myself and have been for a number of years. So, if anything, my cat taught me that, to be present in the moment.
Yes, cats are great key teachers, aren't they?
They are. They
really
really are. They really, really are. All right. What I'd like to do is just take a look at maybe one more of these change grids. And then we'll be done. But this is about mastering media literacy. I have to tell you that out of the entire set, this was the one that I was personally most concerned about. I do believe that when you encounter someone who is face to face with you, attempting to manipulate you, that you guys could do what we've covered in the prior two sessions. This is about handling a conflict, or this is about dealing with an argument or something like that. Okay, you have the skills to do that level of interaction, but this media literacy, decoding media messages effectively. What I meant by decoding them effectively is finding the manipulation it contains. And some of it is very incidental. I get it. But there are times when it is highly, highly calculated. And certainly, if nothing else, those are the ones you should be able to recognize and do something about. So mastering media literacy to me was a really important one.
I
And
was out grid on that one.
well, yeah, you're way out here. So Brian say, by the way, those of you who haven't ever looked at this, whichever name you are, that letter of the alphabet is who you are on this.
That's the only one where I was up in stress. See me H way up at that. That's
There it
the
is. There it is. Right.
one.
So,
And,
I
my
saw
husband's from New York, and I'm not.
yeah, well, and this is the thing. And so who was individual B? Oh, David. David's on the call. David, tell us
Yes.
tell us about the plotting of 5 and 5 for media literacy.
I don't pay that much attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it just didn't seem to be that significant to me.
Yeah. All right. And so interesting. I wanted to bring that up because I want you to see where David is plotting. He is plotting as a driven, driven, amiable, right? A driven, amiable. So what is a driven, amiable? A driven, amiable is someone who is first and foremost an amiable. They're just going about life. They're just kind of getting along, doing whatever it is, experiencing whatever the media happens to be. It's just kind of out there or whatever. Now, this driver secondary energy that's involved here says there is some paying attention going on. And again, notice he's inside the green circle. So there's a lot of good stuff that happens there. This would indicate that it would something that's on his radar, but it has not impacted him enough yet for to put the energy into. Let me change the background image for just a second on engagement. While he is aware of it, an intention has not been formulated. He isn't in a situation where he feels like he has to jump on board. And I wanted to bring that out because he was a bit of an outlier from everyone else. And so whatever it is that you guys have all interpret this activity to get to is a bit different that perhaps in how David did it. You guys all said the importance, the redness is very, very high there. You guys are very much formulating intentions, actively engaged, or out there trying to really do something about it. So is there something that David figured out long ago and it's no longer bothering him, or is there something ahead of David's wave that he hasn't seen the front edge of the wave yet?
And David's in a good spot as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I think David has just decided that he's not going to let it
That's
impact him. Sure,
Right.
it's there, okay, but I'm just going to go on about my life and it's
Yep.
not going to impact me.
That's what
I-
it is, you
But I
know.
think a lot of it goes back to relationships. If you have an individual that you disagree with and they look at certain media all the time and they have created a lot of biases from that, you want to do something about it. So you put on a different engagement. And you want to be kind of driven and expressive, but it's difficult at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, maybe he doesn't feel a need to, inform or get into the way of anybody else.
Well, again, let's talk about this darn close to the center of the changer, this inside the green circle. Remember, inside of here, you're supposed to be very aware of what's going on, but not necessarily connecting into the work yet. The two of you that are very far out, right over here, F and D, you're getting very close to leaving that green circle and getting out there where life is lived, going and doing something about this. So David, on the other hand, is plotting right now on this amiable side of the green circle, which is just about living life, letting life kind of unfold. So being aware of it, but not particularly focused on anything. The awareness is still there. The detachment is there. There's a mellowness that's going on. So that means either you guys are experiencing something that is very different than David, or David has pretty much figured out how to live among all this kind of outgrid activity and found a place for it to just be, sitting in a mellow waiting.
Gee, I used to be a lot more engaged in repeating and interpreting and promoting social media, but I just found that it is absolutely unhelpful. And I just put it all where I think it belongs.
Yeah, yep. A
And
lot
see, I
of,
need to do that probably, but I don't watch like news or any of that. So when I was thinking of media, again, this was quite personal in that I'm thinking from a health perspective. And so you have biohackers, you have all these things out there that are really promoting myths that I fight against all the time when I'm talking with patients. And so I don't tell anyone, oh, don't go on social media, but I'm trying to get them to like even the studies. Who's funding the study?
yeah,
Like there was literally an actor who funded a study about meat is causing cancer and all these different, and it was totally false.
right. But here's the thing. Anyone who's going to mention that on TikTok or YouTube is just trying to get views.
Exactly.
That's all that it's really all about. But we're talking about media overall. That would also include some of the most well-respected, firmly established outlets in existence.
Yeah. And see,
So
I don't watch any of that stuff really, but I do read a lot of the journals and any of the reports that come out dealing with, the newest drug like these GLPs that are flying off the shelves for weight management that's supposed to revolutionize diabetes. And I'm
yeah,
like, you still have processed food.
yeah, and doctors in the 40s told you to smoke. So there you go.
Right.
I mean, come on. So yeah. All right, go with who was that? That was chiming in. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to comment here that I don't even go on Facebook. I don't go on Instagram. I don't do social media. But the thing that I do have is email, and I am an animal lover and have contributed to animal organizations. Not a lot, just a few. I get bombarded with
Yeah.
every possible horror story.
Yeah.
about animal, and that's why I'm up and I get up and stress occasionally about, and it just, you happened to catch me when I was taking this, where I spend all of my time eliminating all of those emails, and
That's right. Trying to cancel them all out. Yeah.
and because it hits me in a core value,
Well, right.
and
Well,
I
and
avoid
again,
the news and everything else, but it's very interesting to see where it put me. Yeah.
yeah, from attention management perspective, again, whoever sent that out to you was trying to manipulate you into doing something. No doubt a donation was involved. And so they were trying to get your level of productive tension to hit that threshold of activation where you would make the phone call, whatever it is they were asking you to actually do. The way they were doing that was by manipulating you physically, emotionally, intellectually, or some combination of those three. Usually those kinds of things are going to be far more emotionally driven with some intellectual substance to it to build whatever their case ends up happening to be. So you get all that. Here's the thing. Even if their purpose was noble, and even if you were listening to it as a volunteer, even if you didn't follow through and made the donation, so the manipulation attempt wasn't effective, it still took a toll. You still paid a price because you had to go energetically into that space. You had to go into that message, and that message moved you around on the change grid. So I would imagine you're an animal lover. They're telling you about things that are happening in a loving way to animals. They're trying to move you up grid. Maybe they were trying to mobilize you. Maybe there's a little bit of but so support this cause kind of thing, trying to get you, a little bit out here where you would.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
that's, yeah.
So I completely get it. My issue around it and why the defending against it is so important isn't so we don't support charities that we care about, but that we don't have to pay the intellectual and emotional toll that these messages are imposing on us, levying on us without our even awareness, let alone permission. So for me, this is why it's so important for people to become more skilled at defending against manipulation. And awareness is your first step on the road to recovery. So
Right.
you got to be aware when the manipulations are going on. And really, if you want to be a little bit of a gifted student, you should be aware of the fact that your biases make you more susceptible to manipulations that match your biases. Um, I don't think that that's necessarily pointing to a bad outcome. It's just for you to recognize the process that's underway. Did they need to do that to get you? No, but nevertheless, you've still paid that price.
Right.
Been exposed to it. So yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place for us to stop for today. I don't know the subject for next week, so you'll be as surprised as I'll be. But every week, I think it's interesting to at least take a quick look at some of these. If you'd like a deeper read on it, I'm happy to do that during your next coaching session if you want to reach out to me. So anyway, there you go. There's lots of ways for you guys to learn how to read grids. Watch our YouTube channel. All right, so those who are watching the video, all those links are in the description block. So let me thank everyone for joining us on today's call and look forward to next time around. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good day, everybody.
See you next week.
Okay,
Cheers.
bye-bye.